Welcome back, everybody. After a week of seasons, I do want to kind of update this Alpha Bear guide. Let's get into it. So first and foremost, if you aren't familiar, thank you again to the REVO guild. This is at this point just me receiving footage or receiving clears, or I guess like footage of whatever people are doing at the top end of the server that I'm in, and they're performing really well. Now again, as you can see, this team involves Smokey because he's a great healer and attack buffer, FLORABELLE because you want to kind of divide and conquer in terms of where the Alpha Bear throws out his honey, and then you also, and she's also a damage dealer to be clear, but you'll also have Rainer here because you want to reduce the amount of damage that the Alpha Bear does, and you also want to provide additional damage to the Odie here. Another big thing here is that unlike with some Enlightenment strat, which you may or may not have seen from one of my previous videos at this point, it is actually kind of nice to place your Odie in a different position than in the backline, because the more and more that you could spread out your characters, the less chance that you have of the honey sticking and clumping and one-shotting everyone at the same time. Furthermore, we also have Coco this time around instead of someone like Rowan or instead of another healer, but Coco is pretty good as he ends up doing both, which is, or as, you know, Coco ends up being both, which is really good. And then furthermore, we have Odie, who's just an absolute monster. Look at that damage. All right, let's take a look at the run though, and we'll see if we can do it or replicate the same. Odie gets sent into the front, and FLORABELLE's little minions are also doing a lot of damage. And as you can see, at first, the backline doesn't take any damage whatsoever. As I mentioned previously, because the Rainer puts or pushes up some of the allies towards the front, the honey is split. Now the honey is basically being hit or is kind of being divided a little bit more evenly, but also just based on the Rainer not only giving out damage, but reducing the damage dealt, it looks like everyone on the team right now is fairly safe. Now, of course, the level of investment that you would need to have in order to have someone like FLORABELLE work really well is a little bit high, or like the level of investment that you need is pretty high. But assuming that you do have FLORABELLE for whatever reason, you could use this. If you don't have FLORABELLE, it's also fine to use someone like CECIA, because of course you would want the Mr. Carlisle to kind of pseudo or to kind of do the same thing. But this time around, I do think that FLORABELLE is doing pretty comparable damage, or doing pretty good damage, especially because, again, you get to buff up the little minions more consistently. You also get to increase the amount of damage that the minions do as well. And to be clear, again, although I do think that the question of FLORABELLE and, you know, CECIA may be there for you, we ended up using light heal spells, so we survived anyways. So I think it was less about the damage of this one and just trying to make sure that all your allies ended up surviving. Now, if we take a look back again at the damage dealt here, it looks ridiculous. It's 1.3 million, or 13, I think it's technically like 1.3 billion, I think, or half a billion here and 1.3 billion here for the Odie. If you end up using something like CECIA, I'm sure the results would be the same. But let's take a look at it if I end up doing it for myself. If I go into the Dream Realm and I test it with maybe not quite the same level of investment, I do have a lot of these characters at Supreme or at Supreme Plus, but I don't actually have access. Oh, actually, one of the runs that I saw one of the top players use was actually with Evocation, which is a spell that I don't have access to, but we'll try and use Light Heal spell as well right now, and we'll see just how well I perform. Just to kind of, I guess, kind of mention or quote it earlier, I did end up getting top 16, which is, I think, fairly decent for my server. There are a lot of people that are definitely more active spenders than I am. I think the last thing I spent on to try and see if she was worth it was Alsa, but outside of that, the game has been fairly generous in terms of getting things or giving things out, especially with the compensation. And as someone that has been not super competitive, I haven't noticed too many of like the nerfs or too many of the damage, or sorry, I guess reward nerfs for me, just because I'm kind of logging on, making content, and just trying to make sure I get Alpha Bear cleared. But as with the season and as with any competitive time limited event, the rewards being nerfed is kind of a big issue. So I was curious if someone that isn't spending as much could still compete with someone that is. And I mean, my Smokey ended up dying here, which is a little bit unfortunate. But although I'm not obviously going to do nearly as much damage, I am still doing about 1.3 million here. As you can see, I actually ended up doing more damage than I would have done prior. And that's likely because of, not only because I did this, or I did my first run at the start of the day, because I did it when it was 8 p.m., but I ended up PRing by another 200 million here. That probably puts me in top 10. Top 14. Okay, not bad. Top 15. Not bad. again, if you just take a look at the different, even the things that they recommend, the Cocos, the Florabelles, the range survivability, I don't know necessarily if you need the tank. If you're going to use someone like Florabelle, maybe you could argue using something but Kruger, but this was the team that I ended up running. I am going to try and test this if I end up using CECIA as well, just because I was curious if it makes that much of a difference. My CECIA is Supreme Plus as well. Same goes for my Florabelle. But it definitely feels like in terms of immediate impact to damage, again, my CECIA may do a little bit less just because it feels like I'm not buffing up the Florabelle summons or as many of the Florabelle summons as easily. If you also aren't familiar, Coco and any character that applies their ultimates, is actually able to affect summons if they end up buffing or while they're on the field. And something that I think a lot of people were mentioning as like an early hack or strat that they were doing to kind of cruise through some stages was that they were actually holding Coco's ultimate until Mr. Carlisle came out so you could buff and summon or buff and affect the summon as well, and Florabelle is no different. The only difference is that actually Florabelle summons seem to come out a little bit earlier, and as you can see here, although there was maybe a little bit more RNG that you could argue here, my damage is still pretty comparable. I'm still at that 1.3 million damage, and I didn't have to pull for Florabelle. Again, there was a little bit of RNG, but I ended up just cutting under like or just over 1.3 million, which is about 100 million less than what my max was at 1.4 billion. I don't know why I keep saying million. The numbers are a little bit ridiculous, but you get it. 1.3 billion instead of 1.4 billion. It's about 100 million difference, which could be the, the difference for you if you're trying to hit a certain rank. But for me, I think that if you're just casually doing this, feel free to just use CECIA instead of Florabelle. In any case, though, guys, that was just, I guess, an initial update to the changes that I saw. Again, if you're curious about the stats and things of that nature, let me get my affinity real quick and my little ticket. Here's all the characters. I have Coco at Supreme Plus. I have Odie at 190. He's also at Supreme Plus. My Smokey as well, who ended up dying a little bit, unfortunately, also at Supreme Plus. The Rainer, I understand Rainer is going to be a pain point for a lot of you players. If you don't or aren't able to use someone like Rainer, feel free to replace him for someone like Thorin just so you could do more damage. But ultimately, outside of that, I have the Florabelle, who, again, you could also argue did a little bit more damage because she is plus 10 instead of CECIA's plus 5. But there are a handful of factors to take into consideration. And I already mentioned that if you don't have Florabelle, feel free to use the CECIA because it's probably pretty comparable damage. Outside of that, though, guys, there's nothing else super secret about this. I think this team is pretty straightforward. It's pretty, I guess, solidified, I want to say at this point. If you want to use someone like Corrin, that's fine as well. But just remember that they decided to change the mechanics of the boss, so characters like Corrin and Marley are nerfed a little bit. But that's going to be it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you guys learned something. If you did, make sure to like, comment, turn on the notification bell, and subscribe. I'll see you on the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy. Check out the rest of my socials and my alt channel. Good night, good afternoon, good morning, goodbye.